A village in Cameroon that woke up dead in 1986. 1,000 people in Tanzania who physically couldn't stop laughing for 18 months. A man who built a UFO in his backyard, left a note saying he'd been invited on a journey and was gone forever. All of them on the same encyclopedia you use to look up movie casts. There are about 6.5 million articles in the English language Wikipedia. Most are exactly what you'd expect. Actors, countries, towns nobody's heard of, or the plot of a movie you forgot existed. You look something up and close the tab. But spread across all those articles, there are entries that, when you actually read them, you sit there for a second and think, how is this on Wikipedia? And how is it even real? If you're getting into this kind of stuff, consider subscribing. Let's start with one I find genuinely unsettling. The Hexham Heads. In February 1971, a kid named Colin Robson was helping his older brother weed the back garden behind their house in Hexham, a small town up in the north of England. He was about 11. His shovel hit something solid, and when he pulled it out, it was a small stone head, about the size of a tennis ball, carved roughly human-shaped, with one eye open and the other half closed. A few minutes later, they pulled out a second one, same size, rounder and more worn down, with what looked like braided hair on the back. They washed them off and put them on the kitchen windowsill. The next morning, things started happening. A bottle of perfume slid across a bedroom dresser by itself and shattered. Furniture rearranged itself in the night. The family dog stood in front of the room where the heads were kept and refused to go in. About a week later, in the house next door, Mrs. Dodd woke up in the middle of the night with the feeling that something was in her bedroom. She turned, and there was, in her own words, a creature, half wolf, half human, standing next to her bed. It moved out into the hallway, and she heard it go down the stairs, but on two legs, like a person. This is in the local newspapers from 1972, not internet folklore that someone made up later. The Hexham Courant ran the story at the time. A professor at the University of Newcastle named Anne Ross, a serious academic who specialized in Celtic religion, not a paranormal investigator, agreed to take the heads. She thought that they might be ancient stone carvings from an old Celtic religion. She brought them home to Southampton. That night, Dr. Ross woke up, same situation as the Dodds, completely certain that there was something in the room. She looked at the doorway. Standing there was something she later described as 6 feet tall, black, part wolf, part man. It turned, padded out of the bedroom, and walked down the stairs on 2 legs. She didn't sleep again in that house with the heads in the building. So the heads got passed on. A researcher named Don Robbins took them next, studying whether certain kinds of stone could hold psychic energy. This was the 70s. People studied things like this at universities back then. Seriously, no joke. In 1978, Robbins handed them off to a dowser named Frank Hyde for further study, and then both Frank Hyde and the Hexham heads disappeared from the record. No obituary anyone has tracked down, no follow-up paper, no museum, no police report. The heads haven't surfaced in any private collection. The man who had last had them is basically untraceable. Whether he died and they were thrown out, whether someone has them in an attic right now, whether they were destroyed, nobody knows. What's on Wikipedia today is a fairly dry, well-researched article. 2 stone heads dug up by a child in 1971 that 2 separate adults swore brought a wolf creature into their bedrooms that vanished in 1978 and have never been seen since. The Mad Gasser of Mattoon. How do you investigate an attacker who turns out to have never existed? In the fall of 1944, in a small Illinois town called Mattoon, the police, the FBI, and the national press spent 2 weeks trying to find that out. It started on September 1st. Mattoon was a farming town of about 15,000 people. Around 11 at night, a woman named Aline Kearney was in bed with her 3-year-old daughter when she smelled something sweet coming through the open window. Within seconds, her legs went numb, her throat started burning, and she couldn't scream. By the time her sister got into the room, Aline was paralyzed from the waist down and her daughter was unconscious. Her husband, arriving home later, said he saw a man crouched at the bedroom window and chased him for half a block before losing him. The next morning, the local paper ran it on the front page. The headline called the attacker an anesthetic prowler. By the next night, the phone lines at the Mattoon Police Department were jammed. Over the next 2 weeks, more than 30 separate attacks were reported. The pattern was always similar. Usually a woman, usually at home, usually in a bedroom in the evening. Sweet-smelling gas through an open window, paralysis, burning throat. Sometimes a figure outside, a tall, thin man in a black cap, a woman in a long coat, and a glimpse of a spray device being pulled back. The Illinois State Police came in. The FBI was called. Chicago papers ran daily updates. Citizen patrols formed. Men sat on porches all night with shotguns. People nailed their windows shut in the middle of an Illinois summer. There were several incidents of neighbors nearly shooting each other thinking they'd spotted the gasser. By mid-September, investigators started noticing patterns that didn't fit. The gas, when described, behaved in ways no real chemical does, present in one room and not the next, vanishing the moment a window opened, leaving no residue. The symptoms didn't match any known anesthetic. People reported symptoms before anyone had been near their house. Several victims turned out to have been miles away at the time of their own attacks. On September 12th, the chief of police gave a statement effectively saying it was over. There was no gasser, and there never had been one. The whole thing was, in the cold language of the official report, imaginary. The report stopped within a week. The newspapers, which had been running it as front-page material for 15 days, moved on. The story was so embarrassing that the town basically agreed to stop talking about it. It's now in psychology textbooks as one of the cleanest documented cases of mass sociogenic illness. The idea that under the right conditions, real physical symptoms can spread from person to person through suggestion alone. People weren't lying. The paralysis, the vomiting, the burning throats, all of it was real. There just wasn't anyone outside the window. The Wikipedia article today refuses to take a side on whether there was a real prowler at the start. Either way, by the end of those 2 weeks, more than 30 people had been physically harmed in their own homes by something that didn't exist. The Tanganyika laughter epidemic. 18 years after Mattoon, on the other side of the world, the same kind of impossible thing happened. Except this one didn't end in 2 weeks. It lasted 18 months and crossed a region the size of a country. It started on January 30th, 1962, at a girls' boarding school in a village called Kashasha, near Lake Victoria, in what was then Tanganyika and is now Tanzania. 3 students, 12, 13, 14 years old, start laughing in class. Kids laugh in class, but the teacher waited for them to settle down, and they didn't settle down. The laughter kept going. After half an hour, the teacher sent them to the hallway. From the hallway, it spread. By the end of that school day, 6 girls were laughing uncontrollably and couldn't stop, and a couple were crying at the same time, because by hour 2, this is no longer funny, this is exhausting, and they couldn't figure out how to make their bodies do anything else. Over the next several days, the laughter spread through the dormitories. Within 2 weeks, 95 of the school's 159 students were affected. Some in fits that lasted minutes, some in fits that lasted hours, a few in episodes that came and went over multiple days. On March 18th, the school shut down and sent the students home. Instead of ending it, that spread it. The first new outbreak hit the village of Nshamba, about 50 miles away, almost immediately after a group of girls from Kashasha returned. 217 people in Nshamba came down with it within weeks. Most adolescents, but adults too, including women in their 30s. Schools in Bukoba started reporting the same thing, then villages around them. By the time the outbreak peaked, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 people across at least 14 different schools and villages had been physically affected. The Tanganyika Ministry of Health had to temporarily close down dozens of schools. The epidemic finally died out in mid-1964, meaning it had lasted on and off for somewhere between 16 and 18 months. Doctors who studied it at the time found nothing. No infection, no toxin, no brain disorder that matched anything they knew. What doctors agree on today is the same as Mattoon: mass psychogenic illness. except where Mattoon ended in 2 weeks. This one lasted nearly 2 years and crossed a region the size of a small country. What disturbs people who read the article today isn't the laughing, it's the fits. The descriptions in the surviving medical records of teenage girls who couldn't stop their own bodies. They'd calm down for a few hours, fall asleep exhausted, wake up and start again. They lost weight because they couldn't keep food down between episodes. In some of the documented cases, they had to be physically restrained for their own safety. The Wikipedia article cites the original 1963 medical paper and wraps up in a few neutral paragraphs. It doesn't really get across what it must have been like to live in one of those villages in 1962, knowing your daughter went to school last Tuesday as a normal girl and came home with something nobody could name. The Belmez faces. There's a house in a small town in southern Spain where, starting in 1971, faces began appearing in the concrete kitchen floor, slowly emerging over the course of weeks, sometimes screaming, occasionally evolving while they were there. This kept happening for 30 years, was witnessed by thousands of people, and the evidence is still on display today. August 23, 1971. Belmez de la Moraleda in Andalusia. A woman named Maria Gomez Camara was in her kitchen, same as every other morning, when she noticed something on the cement floor near the fireplace. It looked, she said, like a face. Eyes, a nose, a mouth slightly open, roughly life-sized, all of it formed in the texture of the concrete itself. She tried to scrub it out. It wouldn't go. Her husband took a pickaxe to the section of the floor and chiseled the face out. They poured new concrete. Within a week, a different face had appeared in the new concrete. This kept happening. Over the next several months, faces appeared in the floor of her kitchen at a rate of several per year. They came in all kinds, old, young, male and female. A few were smiling. Others, in the words of one journalist who visited later, looked like they were screaming. The faces would emerge slowly over the course of weeks, sometimes evolving while they were there, a mouth opening further, an expression changing. A local mayor heard about it, came to look, and ordered the floor dug up. What they found about 3 meters down were human skeletons. The house had been built directly on top of a medieval graveyard. The bones were removed and reburied in a proper cemetery, hoping that whatever was happening would stop. It didn't stop. The faces continued appearing for the next 30 years. By the 1980s, the house was a tourist destination. Spanish television covered it. Paranormal researchers from across Europe came to study the floor. Chemists tested the concrete for paints, dyes, chemical agents, and found nothing they could explain. Skeptics argued Maria was painting them herself at night, using some unknown substance. The Spanish Society for Parapsychology installed monitoring equipment to watch the floor when she wasn't there. Faces kept appearing. Maria Gomez Camara died in 2004. The faces, according to multiple witnesses and the family, continued appearing after her death. The current official explanation, the one the Wikipedia article eventually settles on, is that someone slowly altered the cement using chemicals over time. Nobody has ever reproduced it under proper testing. The house is still standing. Pieces of the floor have been removed and preserved in display cases. You can look at the photographs right now. There are thousands of them. Some of the faces were verified by neighbors as resembling specific people who had been buried in the medieval graveyard underneath the house. The records of those burials, when researchers checked them, lined up. What the article doesn't quite manage to express, in its careful encyclopedia language, is what it must have been like to wake up every morning for 30 years, walk into the same kitchen, and watch a different face form on the floor beneath your feet. Lake Nyos. In the summer of 1986, in northwest Cameroon, 1,746 people went to sleep in their houses and never woke up. No fire, no flood, no killer. Just a lake that overnight released enough invisible gas to suffocate everyone within 15 miles. It is, by raw numbers, the deadliest thing on this list, and almost nobody has heard of it. There's a region in northwest Cameroon with 3 crater lakes, Nyos, Mattoon, and Wum, sitting inside the deep craters of long-dead volcanoes. From the surface, they look like normal mountain lakes. Tourists came through for the fishing. On the night of August 21st, 1986, around 9 in the evening, the village of Lower Nyos was going to bed. It was a farming community, mud brick houses near the water, cattle in the fields. Sometime between 9 and 10 p.m., something happened in the lake. Survivors who were further away described it later as a low rumble, almost like a distant explosion. Witnesses on a ridge above the lake reported seeing a column of water shoot up 200 feet, and then a white cloud spilling over the edge of the crater and rolling down the slope of the valley, fast. This cloud was carbon dioxide, roughly 1.5 million tons of it in a single release. CO2 is heavier than air. It poured down the valley, pushing all the breathable oxygen out of the air along the way, moving at 40 to 50 miles an hour, completely silent and completely invisible, covering an area of about 15 miles around the lake. What it found on the way down were 3 villages: Lower Nyos, Cha, and Subum. Most people were already in bed. They never woke up. Cattle in the fields dropped where they were standing. Some of the people outside or on higher ground lost consciousness, regained it hours later and crawled out. A few survived in the very backs of houses farthest from the lake because their oxygen ran out slower. The morning of August 22nd, the survivors who could still walk came out and found that everyone else was dead. 1,746 people in total, 3,500 head of livestock, insects, birds, and small mammals in numbers nobody counted. When the relief teams arrived, what they found was a region that looked physically intact. No fire, no flooding, no earthquake damage. The houses were still standing, the crops were still in the field, and there were bodies everywhere. In their houses, in their beds, in the doorways of houses that they'd tried to get out of, in the road. The lake itself had turned a deep rust red from iron-rich water kicked up from the bottom during the eruption. Photographs from August 23rd show it looking, depending on the angle, like a wound. Before Lake Nyos, this kind of event, what scientists later named a limnic eruption, wasn't believed to be possible. 2 years earlier, Lake Mattoon, a few kilometers south, had killed 37 people in a smaller version of the same thing, and geologists were still arguing about the cause. After Nyos, the science was settled. It cost almost 2,000 lives to settle it. There are now degassing pipes installed in both lakes to let CO2 escape slowly before it builds up too much. They have to be maintained forever, or this will happen again. An entire region asleep, killed in one night by their own lake. Jar'Edo Wens. I'm gonna break tone for a minute. This one isn't a disaster or a mystery or anything physically dangerous. It's a different kind of horror. And the reason I'm including it is that this changes how you read everything else on this list. On May 29th, 2005, somebody created a Wikipedia article called Jar'Edo Wens. The article was 2 sentences long. It said basically that Jar'Edo Wens was a god in the mythology of the Australian Aboriginal people, associated with earthly knowledge and physical might. That was it. No sources, no citations, no category tags. Nobody noticed. For most of the next decade, that 2-sentence article just sat there. A handful of editors fixed a typo, added a category, linked it from a list of Australian deities. The article was small enough that it didn't trigger any of Wikipedia's automatic quality checks. It looked like one of those tiny, unfinished articles that Wikipedia has thousands of. In 2012, Jar'Edo Wens got cited as a real Aboriginal deity in at least one published non-fiction book on world mythology. A book sold to a general audience. Nobody at the publisher had any reason to doubt it. By that point, the article had also been translated into the French, Polish, Russian, and Turkish Wikipedias. A fake god, with no source for his existence, was now part of encyclopedias around the world and at least one published book. This continued for 10 years. The article was finally flagged in 2015 by an editor named Carbon Cariated, who noticed that none of the sources actually existed, and that Jar'Edo Wens, when said out loud at normal speed, sounds suspiciously like Jar'Edo Wens. The current theory is that some kid named Jared, somewhere in May of 2005, edited his own name into the encyclopedia as an Aboriginal god as a joke, didn't tell anyone, and never came back to delete it. His joke ended up in books, in academic citations, in different language versions of Wikipedia across 3 continents. Wikipedia has a category for cases just like this. It's called Wikipedia hoaxes, and there are dozens of articles in there. There's a long one about a man named Alan McMasters, who supposedly invented the electric toaster in 1893. That article lived on in Wikipedia from 2012 to 2022 and was cited by the BBC, The Scotsman, the Daily Mirror, the Royal Mint, school textbooks, and museum exhibits. The article had a photograph of Alan McMasters, his white beard, his Victorian suit. In 2022, a 15-year-old looking at the article noticed the photograph had been photoshopped and that no such person had ever existed. The reason this case belongs on this list is not that it's scary in the way Lake Nyos is scary. It's that everything else on this list, the heads, the gas, the laughter, the faces, the lake, and the ones still to come, you found out about because Wikipedia chose to tell you. And one of the categories Wikipedia has of itself is articles where the encyclopedia was lying for years and nobody noticed. There's no way to know how many entries you've read on Wikipedia in your life that, in 5 years or 20, are gonna get moved into that category quietly without anyone telling you. Granger Taylor. Okay, back to the regular tone. This one has never been fully explained. Not as a hoax, not as an alien story, not as anything. The man involved built a flying saucer in his backyard, lived in it for 2 years, then disappeared, leaving a note that said he'd been invited away by aliens and was eventually found in a way that fits neither story. Granger Taylor was born in 1948 on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. The kind of kid teachers describe, looking back, with the word prodigy. He dropped out of school in 8th grade because, by everyone's account, he was bored. By his early 20s, he had restored a full-size steam locomotive that is, as of today, in a museum in Duncan, British Columbia, on permanent display. In 1977, Granger built a flying saucer, and not a small one. It was a full-size structure, around 20 feet across, built from 2 old satellite dish antennas welded together, with a hatch, an interior cockpit, and seating for several people. He set it up in his parents' backyard and told his friends he intended to live in it. And then he did for a couple of years. He slept inside it most nights. By all accounts from the people who knew him, he was completely sane. He had a job, he paid his bills. He was just genuinely interested in the question of whether intelligent life out there might be willing to come pick him up, if he built the right kind of structure and waited. In 1980, Granger told his family and one of his closest friends that he'd been in contact. He didn't say with whom, he just said he'd received an invitation and was going to be picked up on November 29th of that year for a journey that would take him away from Earth for about 42 months. On the morning of November 29th, 1980, his pickup truck was gone, and a note was on the kitchen table. The note read in part, "Dear Mother and Father, I have gone away to walk aboard an alien spaceship, as recurring dreams assured a 42-month interstellar voyage to explore the vast universe. Then return." He also left, on the back of the note, a hand-drawn map of his parents' property with several specific locations on it labeled. Granger Taylor didn't come back in 42 months. He didn't come back in any time frame. The RCMP opened a missing persons investigation and searched everywhere they could think to look. The property, Mount Prevost, which was a peak he'd mentioned, the highways, the ports, and the small airfields. They found nothing. For 6 years, nothing. In 1986, a logging crew working the remote face of Mount Prevost found a small scatter of human bone fragments at a site that looked like the location of a fairly significant explosion. Pieces of metal at the same site were identified as fragments of Granger Taylor's pickup truck. Dental records confirmed it was him. The RCMP closed the case quietly. The official conclusion involved materials from his job site and that he had died at the site. Unofficially, the people closest to him have always insisted that the conclusion doesn't fit the man they knew, or the tone of the note he left. The note doesn't read like a goodbye. It says he's going on a journey and will be back. The part of the story that the article doesn't really explain, that you sort of have to sit with on your own, is that the location where the truck blew up was specifically marked on the hand-drawn map he left on the kitchen table 6 years before it was discovered. He marked the spot. He left a map to it. And as far as anyone knows, he had never been there in his life. Brandon Swanson. What does it mean when someone is on the phone with you, walking through a Minnesota cornfield at 2 in the morning, and mid-sentence they say 2 words and the line goes dead? This is the most recent case on this list. It happened in 2008. Nobody has ever found him. The morning of May 14th, 2008 was supposed to be the start of summer break for Brandon Swanson. He was 19, a college student in Marshall, Minnesota, finishing up his second year of community college and planning to transfer in the fall. The night before, he'd been at an end-of-semester get-together at a friend's house in Canby, a small town about 20 miles north. Around 1:30 in the morning, he started driving home alone, on rural roads, across mostly empty cornfields and farmland. At around 1:50 a.m., he lost control of the car. It ended up in a ditch off the side of the road. He wasn't hurt. He couldn't get the car back out by himself. So he called his parents from where he was. They told him to wait. They'd drive out and find him. What happens over the next 47 minutes is one of the most documented disappearances in American missing persons records. His parents got in their car and drove out toward where Brandon thought he was. He stayed on the phone with them the whole time, walking, trying to find a road sign, a farmhouse, anything that would help them locate him. They couldn't see his car. He couldn't hear theirs. The phone call kept going. He described what he was walking past: fields, a fence, the sound of his own footsteps in the gravel. He estimated his location. They drove there. He wasn't there. He'd been off in his estimate by several miles, possibly several towns. At about 2:45 a.m., still on the phone with his father, Brandon said, "Oh shit." The line went dead. His father immediately called back. The phone rang 5 times and went to voicemail. He called again, with the same result, and then kept calling. The phone never picked up again, but it kept ringing for the next several hours, which meant it was still on, still in service, still somewhere out there with a charged battery. The police came. The search began at sunrise. When investigators eventually located Brandon's car, it turned out he had been off by an enormous amount. The car was about 25 miles away from where he'd thought it was. He had walked, on the phone with his parents, in completely the wrong direction. By tracking the cell phone signal, they eventually narrowed his last known location to a roughly 15-mile wide region of cornfields, sloughs, swampland, and small wooded areas in southwestern Minnesota. The search lasted months. Hundreds of volunteers walked grid patterns across the region. The phone company gave the FBI everything they had on cell tower pings. Dogs trained to find bodies were brought in. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew the area. The Swansons returned every year to walk the same fields themselves. Brandon was never found. No body, no phone, no clothing, no backpack, nothing. After this case, Minnesota passed a new law called Brandon's Law, which requires police to immediately open missing persons investigations on adults rather than waiting 24 hours. The Wikipedia article on his disappearance is short, under 2,000 words, but it includes a detail the news coverage often leaves out. In the years since, the family has gradually accepted that he probably stepped wrong in the dark and ended up in a slough, wet, deep, and big enough that a body might never resurface. But none of that quite explains the oh shit. That isn't the sound of someone slipping. That's the sound of someone seeing something. Mary Toft. I want to end on this one because of the 9 on this list, it's the oldest, and the only one where nothing supernatural is going on. And somehow, it ends up being one of the most disturbing, for reasons that take a while to unpack. Mary Toft was a peasant woman in Godalming, a small town in Surrey in the south of England. In 1726, she was 25 years old, working in the fields, and married to a cloth worker named Joshua Toft. She'd had 3 children. Earlier that year, she had miscarried, and she had returned to the fields fairly soon after, which was just what poor women in 1726 did. In late September of 1726, Mary went into labor. But what her mother-in-law, who was acting as a midwife, delivered was not a baby. It was what the family later described as the parts of a pig. Over the next several weeks, the same thing kept happening. Mary would appear to go into labor, and animal parts would come out. The local apothecary, John Howard, was called in to investigate. By his own count, he was present for the delivery of several more monstrous births. Pieces of rabbit, pieces of cat, what he believed were small animal organs. He wrote letters about the case to the medical establishment in London. The letters caught the attention of Nathaniel St. Andre, who was the personal surgeon to King George I. St. Andre was a respected figure, French-trained, well known in London medical circles. He travelled down to Godalming to see for himself. He was present at what he believed was the delivery of a rabbit's head and rabbit's torso. He examined Mary, he examined the specimens, and he became convinced in writing that the births were genuine. He went back to London and informed the king. The king sent a second royal physician to verify it. That physician also signed off, initially, that this was a real medical phenomenon. Mary Toft was moved to London under royal supervision. Crowds gathered outside the building where she was being kept. Newspapers ran daily updates. Distinguished doctors travelled in from across Europe. Books were being prepared for publication. For about a month, Mary Toft was the most famous woman in England, and the medical experts agreed that a peasant woman from Surrey was giving birth to rabbits. The whole thing fell apart in early December of 1726, when a porter at the building where Mary was being kept was caught smuggling a small rabbit into her room. Under questioning, Mary confessed. She had been inserting the rabbit and cat parts manually, sometimes for weeks before each birth. She had done it the first time because she had read about another case in a pamphlet and thought that giving birth to something unusual might get her family a pension from the crown. After the first one worked, the doctors kept coming and she just kept going. She was arrested. She spent 4 months in prison. Several of the doctors who had supported her were professionally destroyed. Nathaniel St. Andre, the king's surgeon, never recovered. The engraver William Hogarth made several harsh cartoons making fun of the doctors, which you can still see in the British Museum today. Mary went back to Godalming, had 2 more children, and died in 1763, having never spoken publicly about the case again. The Wikipedia article on Mary Toft treats the whole thing as a medical history case study. The reason I think about it more than I should is the part right at the end. She was put in prison. The doctors were ruined. Hogarth made his prints. The case became a textbook example of how easily even trained experts can be fooled. And then, 300 years later, you and I are sitting here in 2026, and you've just listened to me describe, in the same tone the Wikipedia article uses, 9 separate things that are supposed to have happened on this planet to real people. 2 stone heads that drove a wolf into someone's bedroom. A town terrorized for 2 weeks by a gas that wasn't there. 1,000 laughing children who couldn't stop. Faces appearing in a kitchen floor for 30 years. A village asleep that woke up dead. A god who was real because the encyclopedia said he was. A man who was invited on a journey by aliens and left a map to his own grave. A 19-year-old who said 2 words into a phone and was gone. A woman who gave birth to rabbits in front of the king's surgeon. 8 of these things, our best current understanding says, really happened, in some form, to actual people. One of them was a complete invention that nobody noticed for 10 years. I'm not gonna tell you which is which beyond what I already have. That's why this video is called what it is. Wikipedia has, like I said at the start, around 6.5 million articles in English. There are probably more articles like the ones we just went through that I haven't found yet. If you have one, if you've got a Wikipedia rabbit hole you fell into one night that you've been waiting for someone to make a video about, leave it in the comments. I read them, genuinely. The next one of these I make, the case list is probably coming from down there. If this is the first time you've seen one of these, the channel is called Obscuria, and most of what we do here is this kind of thing. Long videos, carefully researched, about the strange and obscure parts of the internet and history. There's more on the channel. That's all I've got for this one. Thanks for sitting through it with me. I'll see you in the next one.